My girlfriend said, "My friends come first, you come second. They'll still be here when you're gone." I disappeared that evening without any response. I'd been dating Chloe for 2 years, thinking we were building something real together, but apparently I was just the supporting character in her friend group's ongoing drama series. The breaking point came on what should have been one of the best nights of my life. I'd just gotten promoted to senior veterinary technician at the animal hospital, a position I'd been working toward for 3 years through night classes and extra training sessions. I planned a celebration dinner at this Italian place we'd talked about trying, made reservations for 7 p.m., even bought a bottle of wine I definitely couldn't afford on my old salary. The promotion came with a $6,000 raise and more responsibility with surgical procedures, something I'd dreamed about since starting as a basic tech right out of community college. But when I called Chloe that afternoon to confirm our dinner plans, she hit me with the news that she couldn't make it. "It's karaoke night with the inner circle," she said, like that explained everything. The inner circle, that's what they call themselves. Zoe, Mason, Riley, and Quinn, plus Chloe. 5 adults in their late 20s who treated their weekly social calendar like sacred religious observances that could never, under any circumstances, be missed or rescheduled. They had group chats for everything, color-coded calendars, and emergency protocols for when someone was running late to their hangouts. I'd watched them spend entire evenings planning their next gathering while ignoring the actual gathering they were currently at. I stood in the break room at work, still wearing scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and dog shampoo, trying to process what I was hearing. Around me, my coworkers were celebrating my promotion with a grocery store cake, and I had to excuse myself to take this call. "Can't we celebrate tomorrow instead?" I asked, already knowing the answer because I'd learned Chloe's patterns over 2 years. "Daniel, you know how important these nights are to us. It's about consistency and showing up for each other. We've never missed a Thursday karaoke night, not once. That's what makes us special. What about showing up for me?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. In the background, I could hear her getting ready, the familiar sounds of her makeup routine, the closet doors opening and closing as she tried on different outfits for her friends who would photograph every moment for their coordinated Instagram stories. "Look," she finally said, and I could hear the irritation creeping into her voice, "my friends come first, you come second. They'll still be here when you're gone, and they've proven their loyalty over and over. You're asking me to choose between you and my chosen family, and that's not fair." Chosen family. That's what they called each other, like they were survivors of some great trauma instead of 5 people who met at a wine tasting class 2 years ago and decided they were soulmates. They even had matching tattoos, little circles on their wrists that they'd gotten during a weekend trip to Portland, documenting the entire experience with a hashtag campaign. "I'm not asking you to choose," I said quietly, watching through the break room window as Dr. Martinez examined a golden retriever in examination room 3. "I'm asking you to care that something good happened to me. I do care, but Daniel, this is just one dinner. We can celebrate anytime. Karaoke night only happens once a week, and if I miss it, I'm letting down 4 people instead of just one. Just one." That's how she saw me, not as her boyfriend of 2 years, not as someone who mattered enough to occasionally take priority, just one person whose feelings were worth less than the collective disappointment of her friend group. When I got home that night, Chloe was already gone, having left a trail of glitter and the lingering scent of her expensive perfume throughout our apartment. On our kitchen counter, I found a stack of matching t-shirts she'd ordered for the group's upcoming camping trip, bright yellow shirts with "Inner Circle Forever" printed in rainbow letters, complete with little camping icons and their names on the back. 5 shirts, $32 each according to the receipt. My family reunion was the same weekend as their camping trip, something I'd mentioned multiple times over the past month, something that was marked on the calendar we shared. Something she'd apparently forgotten completely while spending $160 on matching outfits for her friends. I stood there holding those ridiculous shirts, thinking about how she'd spent money we didn't really have on custom uniforms for people who would probably forget her name in 5 years, while completely blanking on something that mattered to me and my actual family. That's when I realized I wasn't just dating Chloe, I was dating her entire friend group, and I was losing that election by a landslide every single day. The promotion dinner I ate alone that night, sitting at my kitchen table with takeout Chinese food and the bottle of wine I'd bought for our celebration, tasted like the most expensive meal I'd ever had. Not because of the wine, but because it was the moment I finally understood exactly what I was worth to the person I thought loved me. Instead of fighting or trying to change her mind, I did something that probably surprised both of us. I started planning my exit strategy with the same methodical approach I used for complex surgical procedures at work. The opportunity came when Chloe announced the Inner Circle was going to a 3-day music festival 2 hours away, complete with matching flower crowns and a rented RV that Mason's uncle was letting them borrow. She was practically vibrating with excitement about their epic adventure, and barely noticed when I mentioned I might visit my friend Trevor that weekend. I'd been saving money from my promotion, and within days of that conversation, I'd secured a studio apartment across town, just 15 minutes from the animal hospital. It wasn't much, 450 square feet with a Murphy bed and a kitchen the size of a closet, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was somewhere I could think clearly without constant reminders of how little I mattered in my own relationship. The moving process became almost therapeutic, like performing surgery on my own life. During my lunch breaks, I'd drive to the apartment with boxes of books, my vintage medical textbooks from veterinary school, and the small electronics that Chloe never paid attention to anyway. She was so absorbed in planning festival outfits and coordinating group chat logistics that she didn't notice my systematic removal of everything that mattered to me. Trevor helped with the larger items, my motorcycle that I'd restored myself, the leather couch I'd bought secondhand and spent weekends conditioning back to life, my desk with all the veterinary journals I collected like other people collected magazines. "You sure about this, man?" he asked as we loaded the bike into his truck. "She doesn't even know you're leaving." "She made it pretty clear where I stand," I said, securing the tie-downs with probably more force than necessary. "I'm just accepting the reality she already established." Trevor had watched this relationship from the beginning, had seen how I gradually became less and less present at our own hangouts because Chloe always had some inner circle emergency that required immediate attention. He'd stopped asking me to join him for weekend activities because the answer was always the same: Chloe had plans with her friends. "What are you going to tell her?" "Nothing," I said and realized I meant it. "She told me they'll still be here when I'm gone." I'm just making that prediction come true. The night before they left for the festival, I packed my final box while Chloe was at Quinn's apartment for what she called festival prep, but was really just an excuse to drink wine and take pictures of each other in different bohemian outfits. I left my key on her dresser next to a handwritten letter, not because I owed her an explanation, but because I owed myself the satisfaction of saying exactly what I thought without interruption or argument. "Chloe," I wrote, "you were right about your friends being there when I'm gone. What you didn't realize is that you taught me the difference between being wanted and being needed, and I finally understand that I want to be with someone who actually wants me back. I hope you and the Inner Circle have everything you're looking for. Take care, Daniel." I signed my name, turned off the lights, and walked out of an apartment that had never really felt like home anyway. The next morning, while they were loading their RV with enough supplies for a month-long expedition, I was moving the last of my things into a place where I could finally hear my own thoughts. For the first time in 2 years, I woke up on a Saturday morning without checking my phone to see what group activity I was expected to accommodate. Instead, I made coffee in my tiny kitchen, sat on my leather couch, and read a veterinary journal about new surgical techniques while listening to whatever I wanted on the radio. It was the quietest, most peaceful morning I'd had in longer than I could remember, and I realized that leaving wasn't just about Chloe, it was about finding myself again. The festival ended on Sunday, and by Monday morning, my phone was exploding with notifications like a bomb had gone off in digital space. Chloe had returned to find my key and letter, and apparently the Inner Circle had declared this a 5-alarm emergency requiring immediate mobilization of all available resources. The first wave came from Chloe herself, 17 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and a string of texts that evolved from confusion to anger to what I can only describe as panic. "Daniel, what is this? Call me back right now. This is insane. You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk." Then came the reinforcements. Mason sent me a message at 6:47 a.m. "Dude, what the hell? Chloe's a mess. You can't just abandon someone like this. Be a man and talk to her." Riley followed with, "This is so dramatic, Daniel. Everyone has relationship problems. You don't just run away. Come back and work this out like adults." Quinn opted for the guilt trip approach. "You're destroying our whole group dynamic. Do you realize how selfish this is? Chloe hasn't stopped crying. Fix this. Zoe went straight for character assassination. I always knew you were emotionally unavailable. Poor Chloe deserves so much better than someone who gives up the first time things get hard. What struck me wasn't the messages themselves, but the coordinated nature of them. They'd clearly held a group meeting to strategize how to get me back, assigning each person different emotional manipulation tactics like they were running a military operation. Mason would appeal to my masculinity, Riley would shame me for being dramatic, Quinn would make me feel guilty about their group, and Zoe would attack my character directly. It was almost impressive in its calculated cruelty. But the real escalation began when they figured out where I worked. Mason showed up at the animal hospital during my lunch break, storming into the lobby in his expensive sneakers and designer sunglasses like he was about to negotiate a hostage situation. "We need to talk," he announced to our receptionist, Jennifer, who looked at him like he might be having some kind of medical emergency. "I'm here about Daniel's situation." I came out of the break room to find him pacing near the cat adoption display, and I could see Dr. Martinez watching through the office window with obvious concern. Mason had this way of commanding attention wherever he went, and our quiet veterinary practice wasn't equipped for whatever drama he was bringing. "Mason, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? What are you doing, disappearing like some kind of coward? Do you have any idea what you've done to Chloe? She's been crying for 3 days straight." "That's between me and her," I said, keeping my voice low because we had clients in the waiting area with their pets. "No, it's not just between you and her. You've destroyed our entire friend group. Do you think you can just walk away from people who care about you?" The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who'd never once asked how I was doing during 2 years of being systematically ignored were now claiming they cared about me. "I'm not walking away from anyone," I said. "I'm just not dating Chloe anymore. This isn't how you break up with someone. You don't just vanish. You don't leave cryptic letters. You sit down and have an adult conversation." Mason was getting louder, and I could see Jennifer reaching for the phone, probably ready to call security if this escalated further. "I tried having conversations for 2 years, I replied. She made it clear where I stood. "I'm just accepting what she already told me." He followed me outside, still lecturing me about proper breakup protocol and emotional maturity, apparently unaware that he was proving my point about their group's inability to respect boundaries. The harassment campaign intensified from there. Riley created fake profiles on dating apps, not to match with me, but to send me lengthy messages about how I was running away from real love and needed to stop being so stubborn and prideful. Quinn started showing up at places I'd mentioned going, the coffee shop near work, the bookstore where I bought my veterinary journals, even the motorcycle repair shop where I got my bike serviced. She'd pretend these were coincidental encounters, then launch into speeches about how relationships require compromise and sacrifice. The most disturbing escalation came when they figured out my new address. I came home from a particularly long day dealing with a difficult surgery to find gift bags hanging from my apartment door handle. Inside were items I'd left at Chloe's place, my coffee mug, a sweater, some DVDs, along with handwritten notes from each member of the inner circle about why I needed to come home. Zoe's note was especially manipulative. "Daniel, I know I was harsh before, but that's because I care about you both so much. You and Chloe are meant to be together. Don't let pride destroy something beautiful." The building's security cameras later showed me that they'd been taking shifts watching my building, documenting my schedule like private investigators. Riley had been there at 6 a.m. one morning, Quinn at lunchtime, and Mason during evening hours. They were treating my breakup like a group project that required round-the-clock surveillance and intervention. When I found Zoe trying to slip another note under my door at 2 a.m., I finally contacted building security and started documenting everything with photos and screenshots. The level of obsession was genuinely disturbing, and I realized I hadn't just left Chloe, I'd escaped from something much more toxic and controlling than I'd understood while I was in it. 2 weeks after my great escape, I thought the worst of their campaign was behind me, but I was wrong. They were just getting started with what can only be described as a full-scale intervention ambush. I'd been working a late shift at the hospital because one of our regular clients brought in a German Shepherd with complications from a routine surgery, and by the time I got home it was nearly 10 p.m. I was exhausted, covered in dog hair and antiseptic, looking forward to nothing more than a shower and some leftover pizza. But as I walked into my building's lobby, I found all 5 members of the inner circle waiting for me like some kind of bizarre welcoming committee. Chloe was holding a poster board covered in glitter and photos of us together with "Reasons Why We Belong Together" written across the top in rainbow markers. Mason had his phone out, clearly recording everything for what I later learned was their private Instagram account where they'd been documenting their mission to save Daniel from himself. Riley was clutching a bouquet of flowers that looked like she'd grabbed them from a grocery store display, and Quinn was actually wearing the matching t-shirt from their camping trip, apparently thinking this would trigger some kind of nostalgic response. Zoe stood slightly apart from the group, arms crossed, looking like she was supervising a hostage negotiation. "Daniel!" Chloe practically shouted when she saw me, her voice echoing off the marble walls of the lobby. "We need to talk. All of us. As a family." I stopped in my tracks, genuinely stunned by the audacity of what I was seeing. Somehow, they'd convinced Gary, our building manager, to let them wait inside instead of on the street. Later, I found out they told him they were planning a surprise birthday party for me and needed to coordinate the logistics. Gary, being a nice guy in his 60s who probably thought this was sweet, had let them set up camp in the lobby for the better part of 3 hours. "How did you get in here?" I asked, though I was already piecing together their manipulation tactics. "That doesn't matter," Chloe said, stepping forward with her poster board like she was presenting evidence in court. "What matters is that you're punishing all of us for caring too much. Look at this list, Daniel. Look at all the reasons we're perfect together." She started reading from her poster. "Number 1, you love my laugh. Number 2, we both like pineapple on pizza. Number 3, you said I was the most beautiful girl you'd ever seen. Number 4, we have the same Netflix password." The list continued for what felt like an eternity, each item more superficial than the last. She'd apparently spent hours crafting this monument to our relationship, but it read like a description of any generic couple rather than something specific to who we actually were as people. Meanwhile, Mason kept his phone trained on my face, clearly hoping to capture some kind of emotional breakdown for their group's social media content. "This is insane," I said, heading for the elevator. "You can't just ambush someone in their own building." "We're not ambushing you," Quinn said, stepping directly into my path with tears streaming down her face. "We're trying to save our chosen family. Don't you understand what you're doing to us? We're falling apart without you." The theatrical crying was something I'd seen Quinn deploy before when she wanted something. She'd done it when Mason refused to change his vacation dates to accommodate her birthday party, and again when Riley started dating someone Quinn didn't approve of. It was emotional manipulation disguised as vulnerability, and I was tired of pretending it was genuine. "You're not falling apart without me," I said. "You barely acknowledged I existed when I was actually around." "That's not true." Riley jumped in, waving her grocery store flowers like a weapon. "We invited you to everything. You just never wanted to participate." "I never wanted to participate in being the designated photographer for your group activities and the guy who paid for dinner when the check came." The elevator arrived and I stepped inside, but Quinn physically blocked the doors from closing with her body. "Please, Daniel, just give us 5 minutes. Let us explain how much you mean to all of us." "You had 2 years to show me how much I meant to you," I said. "The time for explanations is over." Chloe pushed past Quinn into the elevator with me, her poster board crumpled against the wall. "You can't just throw away 3 years like this. We had plans. We were going to move in together officially. We were going to get a dog. We were going to travel to Europe next summer." "You were going to travel to Europe with your friends?" I corrected. "I was going to pay for it." The elevator doors finally closed, but instead of going to my floor, Chloe hit the emergency stop button. For a moment, we were trapped in that small space together, and I could see how genuinely desperate she'd become. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged, her hair was messy, and there was a manic energy in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I took you for granted. But that doesn't mean we can't fix this. People make mistakes in relationships. That's normal. You don't just walk away from someone you love because they made mistakes." "Chloe, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Every single time you picked your friends over me, that was a choice. Every time you forgot something important to me while remembering every detail of their lives, that was a choice." I reached around her to restart the elevator. "And now I'm making a choice too. When the doors opened on my floor, building security was waiting. Gary had apparently realized something was wrong when he heard Quinn crying in the lobby and Mason's increasingly aggressive attempts to follow me upstairs. The security footage later revealed they'd been taking shifts watching my building for 3 days, mapping out my schedule and planning this intervention like a military operation. As I walked to my apartment, I could hear Chloe pleading with the security guard, explaining that this was all a big misunderstanding and they were just trying to help someone they cared about. But I was done being someone's project to fix, and I was definitely done being the villain in their group narrative just because I'd finally decided to value myself enough to walk away. 3 months later, the universe started delivering the kind of ironic justice that makes you believe in karma, and I had a front row seat to watch the inner circle implode under the weight of its own manufactured drama. The first crack appeared when Mason got a promotion at his marketing firm that required him to relocate to Denver within 6 weeks. Instead of celebrating his success, the group treated his announcement like a personal betrayal, with Chloe leading the charge in passive-aggressive guilt trips about abandoning the family. I learned about this through Trevor, who'd remained friends with Mason despite everything and found the whole situation hilarious. "Dude, they're actually mad at him for taking a better job," Trevor told me over beers at our favorite brewery. Chloe kept saying he was pulling a Daniel by prioritizing his career over their friendship. The lack of self-awareness is incredible. Meanwhile, I was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. The extra money from not subsidizing group activities meant I could finally afford things I'd been putting off for years, like adopting Bandit, a 3-year-old golden retriever mix who'd been surrendered to our clinic after his elderly owner passed away. Bandit had been at the shelter for months because he was older and had some minor health issues that made him less adoptable, but he was exactly what I didn't know I was looking for. Having a dog meant establishing new routines that had nothing to do with anyone else's social calendar. Morning walks before work, evening trips to the dog park, weekend hikes at state trails I'd never had time to explore when I was constantly accommodating Chloe's group activities. Bandit was the perfect companion, loyal, grateful for attention, and completely uninterested in drama or social media. I also enrolled in evening classes for advanced veterinary surgical techniques, something I'd been wanting to do since my promotion but couldn't because it conflicted with the inner circle's sacred Thursday night activities. Learning to perform more complex procedures on small animals had been a goal since I started in veterinary medicine, and finally having the time and mental energy to pursue it felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. The second major crack in their group dynamic came when Zoe started dating Marcus, a software engineer from her office who had the audacity to want to spend time with his girlfriend on weekends. Suddenly, Zoe wasn't available for every group brunch, shopping trip, and impromptu hangout session. The inner circle's reaction was swift and predictable. They started referring to Marcus as Zoe's phase and making passive-aggressive comments about how relationships shouldn't change people. "It's like she doesn't even care about us anymore," Riley complained to mutual friends, apparently unaware that she was describing exactly what I'd experienced for 2 years. The irony was lost on all of them. They were experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be deprioritized by someone they cared about, but instead of gaining empathy for my situation, they just doubled down on their victim narrative. Quinn started posting increasingly desperate motivational quotes on Instagram about real friends who stick around and loyalty being rare in today's world. Mason, preparing for his move to Denver, grew tired of the constant guilt trips and started missing their weekly gatherings to focus on apartment hunting and job preparation. This triggered another round of group crisis meetings where they analyzed his behavior like he was showing symptoms of a concerning medical condition. The whole thing was fascinating to watch from a distance. They'd built their entire identity around being an unbreakable unit, but the moment real life started interfering with their fantasy, the cracks began showing immediately. While their carefully constructed social ecosystem was collapsing, I was building something actually sustainable. My relationship with Lisa started casually when she began volunteering at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where our clinics sometimes referred injured wild animals. She was a middle school science teacher who spent her weekends helping nurse injured hawks and raccoons back to health, and something about her genuine compassion for animals made me want to get to know her better. Our first real conversation happened over an injured owl that had been hit by a car. While I handled the initial medical assessment, she stayed late to monitor its recovery, reading to it from a nature magazine because she'd heard somewhere that familiar voices help traumatized animals heal faster. "You know that's probably not scientifically proven," I said, watching her flip through articles about migration patterns. Probably not, she agreed, but it's not hurting anything, and I like to think it helps. That simple philosophy, doing something kind just because it might help, was so different from the inner circle's performative altruism and social media activism that I found myself looking forward to our weekend volunteer shifts together. Lisa never asked me to prioritize her over my friends, never demanded my attention, never made me feel guilty for having interests outside of our relationship. She had her own life, her own goals, her own circle of teacher friends who got together for hiking trips and book clubs without requiring anyone to sign loyalty pledges or coordinate matching outfits. As her carefully constructed friend group continued fragmenting around her, Chloe entered what I can only describe as a desperate reconciliation phase that would have been pathetic if it weren't so invasive. The 3 a.m. voice messages started in late October, long rambling monologues that arrived while I was sleeping and greeted me like unwelcome ghosts when I checked my phone in the morning. Daniel, I know you're probably asleep, but I can't stop thinking about what you said in the elevator. Her voice would whisper through my phone speaker, slightly slurred from whatever wine she'd been drinking. You were right about me making choices, and I'm starting to understand what you meant. Mason's moving to Denver next week, and Zoe barely talks to us anymore, and I keep thinking about how you tried to tell me this would happen. The messages grew longer and more intrusive as the weeks passed, sometimes lasting 15 or 20 minutes as she narrated her evening routine, brushing her teeth, getting ready for bed, lying awake analyzing every moment of our relationship like she was studying for a test she'd already failed. I was watching Netflix tonight and that show we used to like came on, and I realized I don't even remember what you thought about the ending because I was always on my phone texting the group. That's not normal, is it? I should remember what my boyfriend thought about things. Her sudden self-awareness would have been touching if it hadn't taken losing me for her to develop it. But Chloe wasn't content with just voice messages. She started showing up at places she'd never visited while we were together, places I'd mentioned going to that she'd previously dismissed as boring or beneath her social standards. I'd spot her at the coffee shop near the animal hospital, sitting alone with a book she wasn't reading, clearly hoping I'd notice her and start a conversation. She began frequenting the dog park where I took Bandit for his evening walks, always positioned on a bench with perfect sight lines to the main entrance, pretending to be absorbed in her phone while obviously scanning for my arrival. The most uncomfortable encounter happened at a veterinary supplies store downtown where I'd gone to pick up some specialized surgical equipment for the clinic. I was comparing prices on different suture materials when I heard familiar crying coming from the reptile section. Chloe was standing in front of a display of terrarium accessories, tears streaming down her face as she stared at a collection of ceramic water bowls. Daniel, she said when she noticed me, like she was genuinely surprised to see me there, despite the fact that this was clearly a planned encounter. What are you doing here? Buying supplies for work. What are you doing here? I asked, though the answer was obvious. I was just looking around, thinking about getting a pet. Maybe a gecko or something small. Chloe, who had spent 2 years complaining about pet hair on furniture and refusing to let me get so much as a goldfish, was suddenly interested in reptile ownership. I've been thinking a lot about responsibility lately, she continued, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. About taking care of something other than myself. I never realized how selfish I was until everyone started leaving. The breakdown that followed was genuinely painful to witness. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because it was so clearly performative while also being rooted in real desperation. She talked about how Quinn had started graduate school and barely responded to group messages, how Riley was spending all her time with a new boyfriend, how even Zoe's relationship was becoming more serious. You were right about everything, she sobbed in the reptile section while an employee pretended not to notice the drama unfolding near the gecko habitats. I treated you like you were disposable. And now I'm watching everyone else do the same thing to me. The group's falling apart, and I finally understand how lonely you must have felt. I stood there holding a package of surgical sutures, watching someone I'd once loved have a complete meltdown in front of a display of turtle food, and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even sympathy, just a profound indifference that told me I'd truly moved on. I'm sorry you're going through this, I said, and meant it the way you mean it when you hear about a natural disaster affecting strangers. But I can't fix it for you. Her final desperate attempt came a week later when I found a care package on my doorstep addressed to Bandit. Inside was an assortment of expensive dog treats, a plush toy shaped like a veterinarian stethoscope, and a handwritten note that read, "Dear Bandit, I miss being your dog mom. I hope your dad is taking good care of you. Love, Auntie Chloe." The presumption of referring to herself as Bandit's dog mom when she'd never met him, combined with the obvious manipulation of using my pet to get to me, finally pushed me to block her number completely. I'd maintained one avenue of communication out of politeness, but using my dog as an emotional weapon crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. 6 months after my escape from the Inner Circle's toxic ecosystem, I discovered through social media that their carefully constructed chosen family had completely disbanded, scattered across the country like dandelion seeds in a strong wind. Mason was thriving in Denver, posting pictures of mountain hikes and new coworkers without the constant pressure of group obligations. Zoe had gotten engaged to Marcus and moved in with him, her Instagram feed now filled with home renovation projects instead of mandatory group selfies. Riley had taken a job with her family's landscaping business back in her hometown, trading her expensive city apartment for a house with a garden. Even Quinn had found an escape route, starting graduate school for environmental science in another state, finally pursuing the career she'd talked about for years. Their shared Instagram account, @InnerCircleForever, had been abandoned months ago, the last post being a group photo from their camping trip with Family Forever that now read like a monument to misplaced optimism. Chloe's personal account had become a wasteland of increasingly desperate motivational quotes about loyalty and authentic friendship, posted to an audience that had largely stopped engaging. Meanwhile, Lisa and I had settled into the kind of relationship I'd never experienced before, one based on mutual respect rather than desperate attachment. When she suggested we make things official by moving in with Bandit and me, it wasn't because she needed constant validation, but because we genuinely enjoyed building something together without losing our individual identities. The difference was remarkable. Lisa had her own friends, fellow teachers who got together for hiking trips and book clubs, people who treated each other like adults with responsibilities rather than children needing constant supervision. When her friends planned activities, they checked schedules and offered alternatives if someone couldn't make it, never guilt-tripping anyone for having other priorities. Our apartment became a peaceful sanctuary where we could both pursue our interests without judgment. Lisa would grade papers at the kitchen table while I studied veterinary journals on the couch. Bandit sprawled between us like a furry bridge connecting two people who didn't need constant entertainment to feel secure. We cooked dinner together, took turns choosing movies, and had conversations that went deeper than social media updates and group drama. One evening while we were planning a quiet camping trip to a state park, just the three of us, no coordination required with anyone else, I realized I'd learned something valuable from the whole experience. Chloe had been right about one thing: her friends were still there when I was gone. But what she'd failed to understand was that being physically present isn't the same as being emotionally available, and that surrounding yourself with people who enable your worst impulses isn't genuine support. The Inner Circle had been a house of cards built on mutual dependency and manufactured drama, designed to make its members feel special while actually preventing them from growing as individuals. Real relationships don't require you to lose yourself to maintain them, don't demand constant proof of loyalty, and don't fall apart when someone pursues their own goals. As I packed our camping gear while Lisa checked trail maps and Bandit supervised from the passenger seat, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. The life I was building wasn't dramatic or Instagram-worthy, but it was real, sustainable, and completely my own choice.